Twilight glanced the light slowly down the aisle between 5 and 6. The aisle was empty, but the medallion continued to buzz. Spike drew silent as the unicorn began to slowly step through the aisle. She quickly put the map away and pulled the sword out of her magic, holding it ready for anything that might happen. She stopped as the sound of munching suddenly hit her ears. She quickly looked around for the source, hearing it nearby. Then she stopped as she realized where it was. "Spike, it's behind the bookcase," Twilight whispered, looking to the shelf to her left. A spiked tentacle suddenly broke through the shelves, causing Twilight to jump back and raise her sword over her head. Spike wriggled just a foot away from her, having nearly impaled one of them. It seemed to be searching around for something, before coming to settle against the books. The spike stabbed straight through the cover of one of the nearby books before dragging it through to the creature. The sound of munching rang loud as the creature seemed to engulf another book into its mandibles. Twilight nervously raised her hoof to her lips, turning to look at Spike, and giving the quietest shh she could possible. Twilight then aimed the sword to face the bookcase, in case the tentacle returned, and began to slowly tip hoof across the aisle as quietly as she could. She froze for a moment when the creature seemed to give a grunt and stop eating. She didn't move again until she heard it going back to munching away at its find. Twilight soon reached the end of the aisle, and the buzzing of the medallion finally grew quiet. Together, her and Spike let out a collective sigh of relief. "That was too close," Spike said, wiping the sweat off his forehead. "Yeah," Twilight agreed, putting the sword away and pulling the map back out. "But there should be another puzzle piece right over there." Twilight pointed past the 6th bookcase to the wall. Spike looked in the direction she was pointing, seeing the familiar-looking puzzle piece sticking out between 2 books on the bookshelf. Twilight quickly covered the piece with her magic and carefully pulled it out of the shelf. Twilight then looked to the left of the bookcase and spotted a door that led to the back room. On the door was a square space that looked like it slotted 4 separate pieces of the puzzle. "See? I told you that the puzzle pieces opened the door." Twilight smiled as she summoned the second piece from her magic. She aligned the corners of the pieces to where they would fit appropriately in the slot. The pieces fit together with a click each, forming half of the picture. "So, we just need to find the other 2 pieces, and the door will unlock," Spike said, smiling. "It'd be nice if that was that easy." Twilight sighed softly, turning around. She began to walk down the center aisle of all the bookshelves when she stopped, hearing the medallion start buzzing again. "Oh no, not another one!" Twilight softly cursed under her breath and drew the sword once more. She looked around herself. The door was behind her and 2 empty aisles on her sides. She snapped her head back to the center aisle and saw the creature beginning to walk slowly into her field of vision. The 2 tentacles on its back were slowly moving back and forth, as if scanning the air around it. The creature's seemingly skinned head was wobbling back and forth, as if trying to taste or feel things around it. The 2 halves of skin that used to be a head flapped to its sides as it walked. Twilight looked around once more in a panic. The creature was going to be upon her quickly, and Spike was still on her back. She could feel the young dragon gripping her tightly once more. She couldn't stand there and fight, not with Spike possibly being put in danger. She had to find a safe spot for him if she was going to fight again. She turned to her left and quickly ran down the aisle. At the wall, she looked around, trying to find a study room with a working door. The first door was a mangled mess of splintered wood, boarded up to prevent entry. The second, however, had a door that looked perfect. Quickly running to it, she pressed her hooves against it and flung it open. The room was brightly lit, like the last study room she entered, consisting of a simple table once more. She quickly moved inside and shut the door behind her, the loud buzzing of her medallion turning into a very soft hiss, but never quite going away. "Okay, I think we're safe here for the moment," Twilight commented, quietly backing away from the door. "We'll just wait a moment or two, and see if the creature passes." It seemed like a logical idea in her mind. After all, it didn't seem to be in any hurry, and if she could avoid fighting when possible, she'd prefer to. Even then, she could feel the worry building inside of herself, that she would become too accustomed to killing living creatures. "Hey, Twilight! Look there on the table!" Spike suddenly pointed to something that lay on the table. Twilight looked at it. "Isn't that one of the boxes that we found in the library?" "It is, Spike," Twilight said, surprised. There was a small mahogany box lying on the top of the table. Twilight covered it with her magic and levitated it over to herself. "If it's here, that must mean there's something inside of it." She gripped the top of the box with her magic, expecting the box to be locked, and she'd have to go find some minuscule keyhole hidden inside of the box halfway across the library. However, the box opened easily. In the next instance, something shot out of the box quickly, raising straight up and exploding against the ceiling. Twilight bumped into the back of the room out of surprise, as the bright dust began to fall around the room. "Hey, this is the same as back in the library," Spike said, standing up on her back and pointing at the dust. Right afterwards, the princesses showed up. Twilight was going to say something, but the room itself seemed to begin to visibly warp into form. She could barely keep track of the configuration when everything changed, turning into what seemed to be a castle, though not the same castle as the one in Canterlot. "Hast thou heard? The unicorn is coming to the palace. The stories of his talents have spread fast across our lands." The regal voice of Princess Luna was heard, walking with her sister down a hallway to the castle. "He returns from his journey. It is said that he has bested the Dragon of Apocalypse. We have heard stories, and if his words were true, then we have many reasons to be grateful for this powerful stallion." The eldest regal sister, Princess Celestia, spoke in turn to her sister. "For what he has done, we could not. The Dragon of the Apocalypse is a mighty foe, one that would only otherwise have been bested by our combined unity under the elements of harmony." "What is exactly what we speak of, sister?" Luna put her hoof down with more force, stomping in place. Celestia softly turned to look at her younger sibling. "What force can best the elements of harmony? 'Tis impossible, I say. There is no such force that can outshine them. I sense treachery and deceit, dear sister." Celestia was quiet for a moment, considering her sister's anger and her words. She looked towards the ground before looking back up at her sister. "The feats of heroism are astonishing indeed, but I do not rule out the possibility that her words are true. Perhaps it was not a force greater than the elements, but something much more deceptive. Perhaps he did not best the dragon with power, but with wit." Celestia smiled to try and comfort her sister. "We shall reserve our judgment. Until we see this stallion with our own two eyes, his presence shall be one of suspicion and disbelief." Luna raised her head as she walked past her sister. Celestia could only smile and softly shake her head as she followed the younger Alicorn. They approached two large, majestic doors that, with a single grace of their magic, opened wide, revealing a spacious throne room. Guards stood at attention near the throne room chairs as the two sisters took their seats. Their presence was regal and imposing, befitting the rulers of the land. "Guard, fetch for us the unicorn that has come to see us today," Luna decreed at one of the nearby guards. The soldier saluted before spreading its wings and flying in the opposite end of the throne room. While the regal sisters had come in from their back room, the guard opened the doors to the front, where any waiting guests to speak to the royal sisters would wait. Upon the doors opening, a pony began to make its way forward. Around its body it wore a dark blue cloak, with a hood that stretched to cover its face. Around its neck was a golden necklace, the center of which was a blue octagon gemstone. The pony approached the throne, stopping just short and bowing before the princesses. "We welcome thee, brave stallion," Celestia spoke first, setting the regal tone. "Thou may stand and speak with us." "And let us see thy face, so that we may know thee better," Luna added, prompting a look from her sister. "But of course, your majesty." The stallion spoke clearly, his voice deep. He stood from his bow and raised a hoof up, pulling the hood of his cloak back to reveal himself. The Alicorn had a blond, light blue coat, with a long mane of gold. A beard began to form just under his chin, and his face looked just freshly turned stallion. He did not look strong, as though he had had the body of a youth, yet his eyes pierced fiercely with an ice-blue stare, as if in his short life he had seen and learned much. "My name is Merlin, Merlin Ambrosius. I have come to the castle of the royal sisters so that I may speak to thee. It is an honor to meet you both." He bowed once more. The feelings returned. For a pony whose name is heard across the land, we are honored to have met thee. Celestia smiled as Merlin came back from his bow. "Yes, thy feats have amazed us all. Tell us, are thy tales true? Has a pony such as thee vanquished the dragon of the apocalypse, all by thyself?" Luna cut straight to the chase, not wanting to delay the question any longer. "It is true, my lady. Acnologia shall no longer be a threat to our lands." Merlin spoke clearly, without a moment of hesitation in his voice. The quickness of his reply seemed to astonish Luna. "Acnologia? Who, pray tell, is Acnologia?" Luna narrowed her eyes at the suspicious unicorn. "Oh, pardon my manners." Merlin swept some of the hair out of his face so that he could directly see his conversation to her more clearly. "Acnologia was the name of the dragon. I discovered it when I came to confront the creature." "And how did thou take down such a creature?" Celestia asked, as curious as her sister. "Yes, this is a tale we would like to hear," Luna added, wanting to hear of Merlin's words. "It is one that I shall share, nor will it take much time. The dragon of the apocalypse, as thou know, was destroying our lands, leaving destruction in his wake. No pony could stop him, and all diplomacy was for naught. He knew to hide and escape from you, the royal sisters, but he feared not the common pony. When he destroyed the village I had visited, I tracked him to his nearest home and saw him face to face." Merlin began his tale. "And did he not swallow thee or burn thy flesh?" Luna asked, puzzled at him, ever skeptical of his tale. "He did not, for his curiosity had been piqued. He asked what a foolish pony thought he could do, and wanted to hear my words before I died. So I spoke to him, plain and true. I was there to stop his fiendish deeds, and to save our fair ponies and world alike." "And he did not strike thee where thou stood?" Luna winced more. "Nay, your majesty. Instead he bellowed with laughter." He raised his hoof and closed his eyes, giving the impression of an aristocrat. "He thought it hilarious that a common pony like myself would defeat someone such as he." Merlin put his hoof back down and looked back at the princesses. "So I told him that I would offer him a challenge. Interested, he asked what it was. I told him that if I could present him with an item that he could not destroy, that he would lose his power, and be forced to live the rest of his life as but a fair earth pony. Should he break my item, I would give him all the power and strength of a unicorn." "What?" Luna roared loudly across the chamber halls. "If the dragon of apocalypse acquired the power of unicorns, the world would end in but an instant." "Dear sister, calm thyself." Celestia spoke clearly. Luna, realizing that she acted brash. "Let our guest continue his tale." "Very well." Luna calmed herself, sitting back down. "Tell us the rest of the tale." "But of course, your majesty." Merlin adjusted the hair out of his face once more, and continued to speak. "The dragon was confident, knowing his power could shatter anything within the land. He agreed to my game, and I cast the pact-forming spell to ensure that whoever won our game would give up their bet. This is where I learned the name of the dragon, for one must speak thy true name for the pact to work. He then asked me to present an item from my cloak, and I drew this. Merlin reached into his cloak and pulled out a large black scale. "What, pray tell, is that item?" Luna asked, not recognizing it. "It is the very thing that cannot break. For Acnologia, who has the magical power within him to break anything, cannot break but one thing: the armor of his own hide." Merlin held the scale a little higher to behold. "This is a scale from his back. During my travels I witnessed the dragon several times, studying his true nature. During one of those times a scale fell from his back. I know not why it fell, or how it did so, from the impenetrable shell of the beast. But with it in my possession, I challenged him to play my game." Merlin put the scale away, back in his cloak. "So, try as he might, with crushing fists, gnarling jaws, and hot fire as magma, he could not break the scale." "Then what became of the dragon?" Luna asked, demanding to know more. "True to the pact, he could not break his own scale. The spell activated and his power was stripped from him, and his body changed to that of an earth pony. With no way to change back, I left him in his cave to wallow in his new form." Merlin smiled. "And thus ends the terror of Acnologia, the dragon of the apocalypse." "If thy words are true, then there is much to celebrate." Celestia smiled, amazed at the tale. "Once we have confirmed the end of this nightmare upon our lands, we must hold a feast in your honor." "I would be most honored to be hosted a banquet by you, your majesty." Merlin bowed once more. "But I'm afraid there is something else of grave importance that I came to speak to thee with." "Speak away, my subject. You have earned thy words in this room." Celestia spoke once more. "Very well. I shall speak a message first, and then tell you why I came." Merlin cleared his throat quickly, before turning his head, as if not looking at either of the royal sisters, but at some pony that wasn't there yet, as though they would be there for him to look at one day. "Twilight," Merlin spoke clearly. "Thou must find the rest. Memory is the key." The world suddenly twisted and shifted, molding itself back into the simple study room that it had once been. The glowing dust that had fallen from the ceiling faded, leaving no trace that it had ever been there. Twilight and Spike stared in absolute shock at the sight they had just witnessed, at the last words that had been spoken. "Twilight? Was he talking to you?" Spike asked, confused, not sure of what he just saw. I think so, but how is that possible? This wasn't happening right now. That had to have happened a long time ago, well before I was even close to being born." Twilight's mind was reeling, her eyes moving around frantically as she tried to gather her thoughts into one place. Was this a magical documentation of events that had occurred? Is it possible to record events like this? And if so, who had placed this specific event in this box? Why would it be made for me to find in all this crazy mess? Twilight spoke quickly and bewildered. "I don't think it was any of those things. Maybe it was a memory of the past? The Merlin guy did say that memory was the key," Spike said, trying to think about it. "A memory," Twilight thought to herself. "But then, whose memory, Spike?" I guess it'd be Celestia's memory. Or maybe Luna's. They were both present for that event." Spike thought, scratching his head. "Well, he did say I have to find the rest of them. I guess that means there must be more memories like this hiding, like this one was." Twilight examined the box, finding the contents now quite empty. With no need for an empty box, she placed it back down on the table. "Hey, your medallion isn't making any noise anymore." Spike noticed, trying to listen for any sound. "Oh, you're right, Spike." Twilight lifted the medallion with her hoof and looked at it, confirming that it had gone silent. It must be okay to wander outside again, since it was still buzzing when we got in here. Twilight walked over the door and put her hoof against it. "Let's hurry up and find those last two puzzle pieces, Spike, and get into the back room. I have a feeling something very important's back there." "How can you tell?" Spike asked curiously. "Like I said, Spike, whatever's going on is following its own rules. This includes puzzles, the monsters, and things like the memory we just found. Something important is locked inside that back room, or else it wouldn't be locked." Twilight nodded, taking a deep breath and opening the study room door once more. The dark library came into view, and she realized that her pendant had turned itself off in the study room. With a quick tap of her hoof, light returned and she could see into the dark library. She scanned the area around the door quickly, finding no monsters waiting for them in the ambush. It seemed the creature had simply walked by and left them alone. Twilight quickly pulled the map out and examined it. "Okay, the last two pieces are actually nearby. They're that way," Twilight said, looking to her left, before quietly closing the study room door behind her and following along the wall. She scanned with her light down the aisles and looked for bookshelves as she passed, stopping when she saw a light blue book sticking out from one of the nearby shelves. Without moving from the wall, she grasped the book with her magic and levitated it over to herself. The title of the book read, "Heaven's Food." She did a quick glance around to make sure no monsters were nearby, and listened carefully to her medallion, before she opened the book and read what it contained. "Once there were two sisters, one of whom had no children and was rich, the other who had 5 and was a widow, and so poor that she no longer had food enough to satisfy herself and her children. In her need, therefore, she went to her sister and said, 'My children and I are starving, are suffering the greatest of hunger. Art thou rich? Give me a mouthful of bread.' The very rich sister was as hard as a stone, and said, 'I myself have nothing in the house,' and drove away the poor creature with harsh words. After some time, the husband of the rich sister came home, and was just going to cut himself a loaf of bread, when he made the first cut into the loaf. Out flowed red blood. When the woman saw that, she was terrified, and told him what had occurred. He hurried away to help the widow and her children, but when he entered her room, he found her bowed. She had her 2 youngest children in her hooves, and the 3 eldest were lying dead. He offered her food, but she answered, 'For earthly food we no longer have any desire. Heaven has already satisfied the hunger of 3 of us, and it will hearken to our supplications likewise.' Scarcely had she uttered these words that the 2 little ones drew their last breath, whereupon her heart broke, and she sank down, dead. "Can reading wait till later, Twilight? I'd like to finish our business here as quickly as possible," Spike asked, trying to get Twilight's nose out of another book. "Oh, right. Sorry, Spike." Twilight vanished the book into her magic and continued following the wall. Each study door she passed continued to be broken and boarded off. The map showed the last 2 puzzle pieces was one in one of the study rooms, and in the middle of the maze of bookshelves. Twilight's light scanned down the aisles, looking for anything that might jump out at her. The pathways ended when she stopped by a large pile of books, but led down another aisle of the bookshelves. She examined the map and looked at the study room door that she was next to her. The door wasn't broken or boarded up, looking perfectly fine for use. One of the puzzle pieces was contained inside that room. Not wanting to waste any more time, she placed her hoof against the door and pushed it open slightly. Her medallion began to buzz loudly as the sound of chewing struck her ears. She quickly closed the door shut, and the buzzing silenced itself. Oh no. Twilight took a deep breath, realizing she might have to fight another one of those creatures, and opened the door slightly once more. The medallion began to buzz, and she looked in through the crack of the door. The room was brightly lit like the others. She could spot the creature and its tentacles easily. It was devouring a pile of books in the corner of the room, the table pushed on the opposite wall for it to have room. She saw the tentacles floating around its back, looking for some prey to stab into. Her eyes moved over the table, spotting the puzzle piece laying on top of it. She thought about her actions for a moment, before having a brilliant deduction. She lit her horn with magic, and the puzzle piece covered the distance with her magic. The creature feasting stopped for a moment, as if noticing her use of magic. Twilight softly gulped and vanished the piece into her magic before closing the door. The medallion continued to buzz for a moment or two after the door closed, causing Twilight to softly sweat the idea of having been discovered. However, the buzzing grew quiet, and she let out a soft sigh, realizing he'd gotten away with it. "Thank you, Merlin. Your spell has worked miracles today," Twilight thought to herself. She turned around and walked away from the door, heading for the center of the library now. According to the map, the puzzle piece should be right under her nose. At the end of the aisle, she saw it, sitting on the floor comfortably, surrounded by 3 piles of separate books that blocked off any other way to the puzzle piece. It was a dead end in the maze, but a dead end that hid the final piece. With a smile, she whisked the puzzle piece up with her magic and vanished it. "All right, we have all the pieces we need, Spike. Let's go open that door." Twilight smiled contentedly, ready to go to the back room and away from these monsters. She turned around and made her way to the wall, planning to follow it back to the locked puzzle door and putting the pieces in place. As she began to follow along the wall, she stopped in her tracks when the medallion started to buzz once more. She quickly looked down at the aisle that was next to her, hearing the sound of groaning coming from it. From the shadows appeared another one of those creatures, only it seemed different. Its tentacles were at attention, pointing straight forward. Its head wasn't wobbling back and forth, but instead heading straight forward. It wasn't searching. It knew where its prey was now. The creature let out a screeching wail, charging forward, straight at the unprepared unicorn. Twilight leapt forward as the 2 tentacles came crashing down, breaking into a wall where she had just been standing. She couldn't stand around right now. She couldn't stop and fight the thing. With Spike on her back and nowhere safe to quickly put him, she had to just run. She felt like she ran faster than she had ever had before, but the world itself had grown in size. It was all in her mind, she knew, but it felt like the aisle would end. She could hear the creature screeching as it pulled the tentacles out of the wall. It was going to head for her once more. Twilight made a sharp turn at the end of the hall. She could hear her breath as her heart began to pound into her ears. One thing was constantly shouting out in her mind. Spike was in danger. She could feel the baby dragon clinging to her head tightly, looking back at the creature chasing them. She could feel his panicked breath, his terrified claws, his racing heart. Everything about him wanted to be out of danger quickly, and she was the one who had to protect him. She had to get him out of danger. The door came into view, the puzzle pieces still locked into place where she had put them before. She could hear the crashing of books, the splintering of wood behind her as the creature thrashed its tentacles out, in attempting to drive them straight into her body. "Twilight, hurry!" Spike shouted, gripping hold of her mane. Twilight winced at the pain, but held back her words, summoning the 2 pieces of the puzzle out from her magic. With speed and precision, she placed the remaining pieces into the door, hearing it click with the sound of the puzzle being completed. Her magic gripped the door and forced it open, Twilight sprinting straight for it. The creature wailed as its tentacles missed her by inches, slicing through the air. Twilight turned in the open hallway, seeing the creature fall into the flare for the doorway, its skin flapping around as its mandibles mashed around. Her horn lit up, and she swung her head and slammed the door shut, the echo of the slam being heard throughout the library. The medallion didn't let up its buzzing, and Twilight stepped back from the door, still hearing the creature's wail behind it. The sound died down for a moment, causing an unnatural calm. Twilight gulped softly, not liking the quiet. The door cracked, visibly, as something hard was struck against it. Twilight's eyes whitened as she realized the door would be damaged by the creature. Another strike hit the door, loudly splintering the wood it was made of. A tentacle burst through, heading straight for Twilight. She jumped back and let out a startled scream as it stopped a few feet from her. The tentacle suddenly began to wither and writhe. A high-pitched screaming could be heard coming from it as if it were suddenly being attacked. Steam started to rise from the entire appendage as it began to wrinkle and shrink. The creature tried to pull his tentacle back out the door, only for it to fall off mid-pull. The tentacle landed on the ground, curled up, before vanishing completely in the steam of smoke that it had produced. Twilight stared in confusion at where the tentacle had been, then up at the door, hearing the creature wail and moan behind it. It wailed and seemed to scratch at the door for a minute or two, before finally giving up and walking away. The buzz of the medallion began to fade as it walked away, before finally going silent. "What just happened, Twilight?" Spike asked, confused, still holding on for terror to Twilight's neck. I don't know, Spike." Twilight gulped softly, looking down at the ground. Her light illuminated the spot where the tentacle had been. Then she lifted it back up to look down the hallway to see what might have caused the tentacle to suddenly fall apart. "Hey, what's that?" Twilight asked, walking closer to the door, spotting a strange marking on the ground. She carefully stopped right before it, illuminating the symbol with her light. "Hey, isn't it the same symbol from the one as the box on the library?" Spike curiously looked at the design. "It is, Spike." Twilight spoke softly, looking over the strange circle design. It was indeed the circle within circles design with the cryptic runic writing. However, it was different. Instead of being a red symbol, this one was blue. "Do you think this thing being here is what hurt the monster?" "Maybe. It's the only thing that makes sense," Spike commented, tapping his chin in thought. "Then, who put it here?" Twilight pondered as well. The two of them sat there for a minute in thought, before Twilight looked back at the door with a hole in it leading back to the library. "We can contemplate more about it later, Spike. Let's head into the back room and see what we can find." Twilight spoke firmly, turning around and heading down the narrow hallway. Twilight was a little surprised that the back room was at the end of this long, narrow hallway. It seemed unusual for a library to have a useless hallway like this within its borders, anyway. But her light fell upon the door at the end of the hallway, the words, "back room," written onto it. Quickly approaching it, she put her hoof against the door, bracing for what might be behind it, and pushed it open. The door let out a loud creak as she pushed it. She winced at the sound, realizing it would likely attract anything that was inside to the room. Though, when she looked, she found it to be surprisingly well lit. A few candles were lit around the room, and there appeared to be several tables in the center of the room with a few bookshelves along the back wall. "Oh, hello there." A voice suddenly came out, causing Twilight to nearly jump out of her skin. "I wasn't expecting to meet another pony here." Suddenly, a unicorn walked into her view from across the room, one she hadn't seen before. His coat was light brown, his mane a striking blonde, with darker blonde highlights going through it evenly. His face had a pair of glasses that showed off his dark blue eyes, while he had a scruffy goatee growing in around his mouth and nose. On his body was a lighter brown sweater with dark brown edges on it, and a white collar that popped out from the sweater. But most striking of all was that the cutie mark appeared to be a red circle with a simple cross pattern on it, with a large question mark in the middle. He closed a book he had been reading and levitated it gently down onto the table. "I was here doing research on my latest book when things suddenly started to get weird, and so I thought I might poke my nose into some other research." The stallion smiled oddly. Twilight wasn't sure how to read his reaction, but she was grateful to see another pony. Oh, well, I wasn't expecting to see another pony, too. Twilight spoke hesitantly, walking into the room and closing the door behind her. Are you from Stalliongrad? This is the library there, after all. No, I was born in Canterlot, actually, the stallion said, walking closer. But I was in Stalliongrad doing research. Tell me, based on your question, this library is no longer in Stalliongrad. So, where am I? You're in Ponyville, Twilight mentioned, the two stopping a few feet from each other. Spike was gripping onto Twilight's head, eyeing the new pony with suspicion. My name's Twilight Sparkle, and I've been trying to figure out what's going on here. The stallion's face seemed to light up upon hearing the name, before smiling his odd smile. Twilight couldn't help but think he seemed a little off. Twilight Sparkle, the one and only, the student of Princess Celestia and the current wielder of the magic element of harmony. He asked simply, fascinated by this information. Twilight went to open her mouth to respond, but Spike did it for her. She's the one and only, all right. But who are you? Spike asked, pointing a figure accusingly. Spike, what are you doing? Twilight glared softly at the baby dragon's rudeness. Now, it's all right. The stallion smiled, adjusting his glasses. I'm certainly not as famous as you would be, Miss Sparkle, but I have started to gain a name for myself. You see, I've published a few books recently, in my ever-growing hunger to know more about the world. I love nothing more than finding answers to the questions that the world brings up. He chuckled softly to himself, before making sure to look straight into her eyes. My name is Magus. Magus Vince Darkarts. It's a pleasure to meet you. Spike practically fell off Twilight's back. Twilight's jaw felt like it could have hit the floor. There was a moment of stunned shock as Twilight took in all the information. Magus just seemed to chuckle softly at her reaction. Oh my, I take it you've heard of me? He asked, amused. Heard of you? Twilight could barely contain her voice. You're the guy who practically caused this mess. Her mind jumped straight to conclusions. Huh? Magus asked, confused, raising an eyebrow. What do you mean? I certainly would never have anything to do with what's been going on in this library. I've simply been doing research. Well, no, you haven't done anything directly, Twilight said, trying to regain her emotions. But your spell caused a lot of indirect problems, and it's helped some good ponies, too. Twilight bit her lip as she began to realize what she was saying, and how she was reacting. Start from the beginning, Miss Sparkle. What are you talking about? Magus asked, a little more confused than he liked to be. Okay, well, see, I have these friends who started having nightmares, so I looked up a book on dreams and found yours. I used the spell you created called the Mind Delve on them to find out what was wrong. Twilight quickly explained. Ah, yes. Dreams, a psychological understanding. I remember writing that. Magus mused, rubbing his chin. And the Mind Delve is one of my personal favorites. Oh, a lot of work went into weaving that spell. I assume it brought your friends' problems to the front, and they were able to comfort them? Well, yes and no, Twilight explained, causing Magus to be a little confused again. See, I never saw what their problems were. I saw a floating picture, and then the spell ended on its own. But when it was over, my friends said that they'd come to understand their problems, and were better for it. You don't say. Magus thought once more. That certainly is odd. The spell was never intended to do either of those things. Exactly. So if you're here now, can you tell me, why did the spell do that? And what reason would my friends have for not telling me what they experienced while under the Mind Delve? Twilight wanted answers. Magus grew quiet as he thought in silence. It seemed to take a minute or two before he finally responded. "I couldn't tell you, Miss Sparkle," was his answer. "I didn't intend for the spell to have those effects. And you should have seen what their problem was if you cast the spell." He smiled, looking off into the distance. "But this intrigues me now. I'd like to find an answer to this question myself." "Is this guy right in the head?" Spike asked, a little confused about Magus's words. "Spike, no need to be so insulting." Twilight huffed a little before turning back. "Sorry about asking such questions in the situation we're in. I never expected to run into you of all ponies here." "It's all right, Miss Sparkle." Magus nodded slowly. "All things happen for a reason. With the recent phenomenon going on in this library, I've been busy myself with research on it." "How can you research something no ponies have ever experienced before?" Spike asked, confused. "By finding clues and hints left behind, of course." Magus chuckled softly. "Like, for instance, did you know that the monsters that have appeared hate something? It brings them pain and suffering to simply even be in the vicinity of it." "The blue circle." Twilight gasped in realization. "Oh, excellent. You saw that on your way in." Magus smiled, adjusting his glasses again. "That's exactly right. I found that symbol adorned in red while I was here researching. When the monsters suddenly showed up, I knew it couldn't have been coincidence. So, using my knowledge of runic symbols, I figured out quickly that changing the color turned the symbol from a positive effect for the creatures to a negative one." He chuckled softly. "Of course, the symbol does have its limitations." "Huh? What do you mean?" Twilight asked, confused. "You see, Miss Sparkle, the symbol runs on a strange system. The monsters hate the symbol in blue, but only in small numbers. The more you create, the weaker the effect becomes. I discovered this when I tried to create a wall to stop their movements, but they were simply able to walk through it." Magus turned to walk back over to the table where his book now lay. "But if I put one in a single hallway, then the creature feels its maximum effects. So in short..." Magus's horn lit up as he pulled out several different books from the shelves around him and piled them neatly into a small structure in front of him. "You can create a safe room that the monsters won't be able to get inside." "I see. That's amazing. You were able to find all this out in such a short time researching?" Twilight asked, astonished, amazed by his work. "Indeed I have." Magus smiled, walking back towards Twilight. "And I still have a lot more research to do, so I'm going to be remaining here in this safe room until I finished it." "I see." Twilight softly murmured to herself, thinking things through in her head. She had just found a safe room, a room that would prevent any kind of monster attack. She couldn't stay there for long. Her friends needed her, and she needed to find the princess. However, there was something that the safe room could do for her. "Magus?" Twilight spoke suddenly, causing the stallion to tilt his head curiously. "I'm going back outside to look for my friends, and for Princess Celestia. Are you going to be staying here and studying?" "But of course." Magus smiled, adjusting his glasses once more, giving that strange grin of his. "I love finding answers. I'll be here for a while at it." "Good. Then can you please watch my assistant Spike for me?" Twilight pointed the baby dragon with her hoof. "What?" Spike said, shocked at this sudden proposal. "Twilight, what are you doing? You need me with you." "Spike, please." She looked at her assistant before looking at Magus. "Would you be willing to do that for me?" "But of course." Magus smiled his creepy smile. "Anything for the wonderful Miss Sparkle." "Twilight, no! I want to go with you!" Spike cried out, clinging to Twilight's leg. Twilight sighed softly and sat on the ground, holding Spike close to her. She pressed her head up against his chest, so that he could hear her heartbeat. Spike looked up at her worriedly as she smiled down at him. "Listen, Spike, it's dangerous out there. Those creatures don't show any mercy. They'll rip you to shreds if they get the chance. Twilight spoke gravely, yet comfortingly. I know that, and if you're going out there, then that means that they're going to come after you too. I have to be there to protect you. Spike cried out, clinging harder to Twilight. Twilight lifted a hoof and wrapped it around the baby dragon's body, closing her eyes as she hugged him. Spike, listen. I can protect myself. You've seen me do it. I can avoid the monsters and save my life much easier if I don't have to constantly protect you. Twilight opened her eyes and lifted her head. Spike looked up into her eyes as water started to form at the edge of his. I won't be putting myself in any unintentional harm, and I'll stop anything that plans to hurt me. I won't let those things get to me, Spike. But I have to go out and find the others. Twilight put both hooves on his shoulders and lowered her head to look at him, eye level. Do you trust me to keep my word, Spike? Twilight asked solemnly. Spike hesitated, not wanting to be separated from the lavender unicorn, but her words spoke true. If he continued to stay with her, he'd be a liability more than he'd be an aid. I do, Twilight. Spike wrapped his arms around Twilight's neck. I do trust you, and you better come back to me. I won't forgive you if you die on me. I won't, Spike. I promise you. Twilight hugged the baby dragon close to her. They sat there for a while, just enjoying each other's embrace. Well, Magus spoke up finally, causing the two to slowly break out of their hug. If you're going back out there, then maybe this'll help you. His horn lit up, and from a pocket in his sweater, he pulled a strange key. He levitated it over to Twilight, who held out her hoof. The key gently fell into it. I found that back there, but have no use for it since I'll be researching. Perhaps you'll find a use for it out there. Thank you, Magus. Twilight nodded her head, vanishing the key into her magic. Thank you for everything. Don't mention it. Magus flashed his creepy smile, before turning his head back to his books. Twilight stood up and headed back for the door to the library. You're going to come back for me. You got that? Spike said, giving Twilight a soft glare, out of fear and worry. I do. Twilight smiled back at the baby dragon. The two looked at each other for a long period of time, before Twilight opened the door to the back room and exited, leaving her number one assistant behind.